What would it feel like to witness your child achieve a dream you never even imagined for yourself? This is the heartwarming story of Laura and Victor, two parents who had never set foot on an airplane, taking their first flight. Little did they know, their son David had something extraordinary planned for them, something that would leave them speechless. Laura and Victor had lived in a quiet suburb outside Los Angeles for over 40 years. Hardworking and humble, they had spent most of their lives focused on raising their family. Traveling wasn't something they ever considered. Laura often joked, "The farthest I've been is to the next county." Victor, a retired carpenter, shared her feelings. "Flying, that's for other people. I'm fine with my feet on the ground." Their youngest son, David, had always been fascinated by airplanes. As a boy, he would sit for hours with his toy planes, pretending to fly them across the living room. "One day, I'm going to be up there," he'd say, pointing to the skies. Laura and Victor would smile, not realizing just how serious he was. Years later, David fulfilled that childhood dream. He became a commercial airline pilot, a career that filled Laura and Victor with pride but also a sense of mystery. They had never seen David in action, never truly understood what his job entailed. For years, David encouraged his parents to fly. "Mom, Dad, you have to experience it at least once," he'd say. But they always declined, the idea of flying too overwhelming. "Maybe one day," Victor would reply, though Laura suspected that day would never come. But then, David got an idea. He arranged for his parents to fly on one of his routes, Los Angeles to San Francisco. It wasn't a long flight, just over an hour, but it was the perfect opportunity. He didn't tell them he'd be the pilot, wanting to keep it as a surprise. One Saturday morning, Laura and Victor found themselves at Los Angeles International Airport, their nerves hidden behind polite smiles. David had personally escorted them through security, explaining each step of the process. "It's easy, Mom. Just follow me," he said, laughing as Laura clutched her boarding pass like it was a golden ticket. The sight of the massive airplane waiting at the gate made Laura pause. "That thing is huge," she whispered to Victor, gripping his arm. "And we're supposed to get in it?" Victor, though equally nervous, tried to stay composed. "We'll be fine," he said, though his hands betrayed him, fidgeting with the brim of his cap. As they boarded, a kind flight attendant guided them to their seats near the front of the plane. Laura marveled at the rows of seats and the hum of activity. "It's like a bus," she said quietly, "but in the air." Victor nodded, but his eyes kept darting to the window. "I don't think buses go this high." As they settled in, Laura whispered to the flight attendant, "This is our first time flying. Is it always this busy?" The attendant smiled warmly. "It's always exciting the first time. Don't worry, you're in good hands." Laura and Victor didn't know how true those words were. What would happen next would leave them completely speechless. As Laura and Victor buckled their seatbelts, the reality of flying began to sink in. The hum of the engines grew louder, and the bustling sounds of passengers settling in filled the cabin. Laura gripped Victor's hand, her knuckles white. "I still can't believe we're doing this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor gave her a reassuring smile, though his own nerves were evident. "We're fine. David wouldn't let us do this if it wasn't safe." The flight attendant approached, her smile warm and genuine. "First time flying?" she asked, noticing Laura's nervous glance toward the window. Laura nodded quickly. "Yes. My son convinced us to try it. I think he really wanted us to experience this." The flight attendant's smile grew wider, but she said nothing more, moving down the aisle to continue her duties. Victor leaned closer to Laura. "You know, David used to talk about flying all the time. Remember how he'd tape those paper wings to his arms and jump off the porch?" Laura chuckled despite her nerves. "How could I forget? I'm still surprised he didn't break a bone." As the plane began to taxi toward the runway, Laura's grip on Victor's hand tightened. "Are we moving?" Is this it? Victor glanced out the window. Looks like it. I think we're about to take off. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and professional. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Welcome aboard Flight 326, from Los Angeles to San Francisco. We're expecting a smooth ride today, and we'll be cruising at an altitude of 35,000 feet. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight. The voice was familiar, but Laura didn't think much of it in the moment. Victor, however, tilted his head slightly. That voice, does it sound like... Before he could finish, the engines roared to life, and the plane began to pick up speed. Laura's breath caught as the massive aircraft lifted off the ground, the city below shrinking with each passing second. "We're flying," she whispered, her voice filled with a mix of awe and disbelief. Victor stared out the window, his eyes wide. It's beautiful," he said, watching as the sunlit cityscape gave way to soft clouds and endless sky. A short while later, the flight attendant returned with a tray of drinks. She placed 2 cups of water in front of Laura and Victor, leaning in slightly. "You're doing great," she said softly, her tone encouraging. Laura smiled nervously. "Thank you. It's not as bad as I thought it would be. But I keep thinking, what if something goes wrong?" The flight attendant chuckled gently. "Don't worry. You've got the best captain up there. Trust me." Victor looked up, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "You seem awfully confident about that. Do you know him?" The flight attendant's smile widened. "Oh, I do. Very well, in fact. But I'll let him tell you more later." Laura and Victor exchanged puzzled glances, but before they could ask more, the attendant moved on. As the plane leveled out and the ride grew smoother, Laura began to relax slightly. She even let go of Victor's hand, though her grip had left faint marks. Victor chuckled, feeling better. "A little," Laura admitted, though her eyes still darted toward the window occasionally. "I just can't believe how calm everyone else is. They act like this is no big deal." Victor smirked. Maybe we're the only ones making a fuss. A few moments later, the intercom crackled again. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain again. We're cruising comfortably, and I wanted to take a moment to make a special announcement." Laura and Victor's attention snapped to the speaker. The voice continued. "We have 2 very special passengers on board today. My mom and dad, Laura and Victor. It's their first time flying, and I couldn't be prouder to be the one taking them on this journey." Laura froze, her jaw dropping. "Wait. What?" Victor's eyes widened, realization dawning on him. "That's David. That's our son." The passengers around them began to clap and cheer, and some turned to look at the couple with warm smiles. Laura's face flushed as she tried to process what she'd just heard. "He's flying this plane?" Victor grinned, shaking his head in disbelief. "That boy? He didn't say a word about this." As the applause subsided, the captain added, "Mom, Dad, I just want you to know how much this moment means to me. You've supported me every step of the way, and being able to show you the world from up here is something I've dreamed about for a long time. Thank you for trusting me to take you on your first flight. I love you both." Tears welled up in Laura's eyes, and she covered her mouth, overwhelmed with emotion. Victor reached over, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "Our son," he said quietly, his voice filled with pride. "Our son's the captain." Laura nodded, unable to speak as the passengers around them clapped again. The flight attendant returned, a knowing smile on her face. "I told you, you're in the best hands." For Laura and Victor, what had started as a nerve-wracking experience had just turned into one of the most unforgettable moments of their lives. But the surprises weren't over yet. Laura wiped her tears, her hands trembling slightly. She turned to Victor, her voice unsteady. "Can you believe it? Our David, flying this plane." Victor leaned back in his seat, a faint smile playing on his lips. I don't know why I'm surprised. He's always been like this, dreaming big and never stopping until he gets what he wants. But I never thought we'd be up here with him. Passengers around them smiled and exchanged kind words. One woman leaned over and said, "You must be so proud of him." That announcement even brought tears to my eyes. Laura nodded, managing a small laugh. Proud doesn't even begin to describe it. As the flight continued smoothly, Laura and Victor began to relax in a way they hadn't expected. The sense of fear they felt earlier had been replaced by a feeling of awe and pride. Laura glanced out the window, marveling at the soft, fluffy clouds that seemed close enough to touch. Victor leaned toward her. "You know, I was thinking about all those times he sat on the roof, watching planes fly overhead. He'd tell us, 'One day, I'm going to be the one up there.' And here we are." Laura smiled, remembering the countless times she'd scolded David for climbing up there. And he always said it like it was a promise. I guess he was right. A little while later, the flight attendant returned with a tray of snacks and drinks. As she placed the cups on their tray table, she said softly, "The captain asked me to make sure you're comfortable. He's been checking in to see how you're doing." Victor raised an eyebrow, a grin spreading across his face. "Is that right? He's more worried about us than flying this plane?" The attendant laughed. "Not at all. He's a professional. But it's not every day a captain gets to fly his parents for their first time." As she moved on, Laura took a sip of her water and sighed deeply. "It feels different now, doesn't it? Knowing it's him up there." Victor nodded. "Yeah, it does. I feel safe, like I don't have to worry about a thing." Suddenly, the intercom crackled again. David's voice came through, steady and calm. "Mom, Dad, I hope you're enjoying the flight so far. There's something else I wanted to share with you." Laura and Victor exchanged curious glances as the other passengers listened intently. "You've always been my biggest supporters, even when my dreams seemed impossible, and I wouldn't be where I am today without you. So, I want to dedicate this flight to you. You've spent your whole lives making sure I had everything I needed, and now it's my turn to give something back. This moment, it's for you." The cabin filled with applause once again. Laura couldn't stop the tears that streamed down her face, her hands covering her mouth as she sobbed softly. Victor placed an arm around her shoulders, his own eyes misty. "That boy, he's something special," he whispered. The flight attendant appeared once more, holding a small envelope. "The captain asked me to give this to you," she said with a smile, placing it in Laura's hands. Laura opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a handwritten note from David. "Mom and Dad, every time I'm up here, I think about the sacrifices you made for me. Today I finally get to share this part of my life with you. I love you more than words can say. Welcome to the skies. Love, David." Laura pressed the note to her chest, her heart overwhelmed with emotion. Victor read over her shoulder and nodded, his voice thick with pride. He never forgets where he came from, does he? The rest of the flight passed in a blur of emotions. Laura and Victor marveled at the view outside the window, their fear of flying now replaced by a sense of wonder and connection. For them, this wasn't just a flight. It was a celebration of everything they had worked for, and the incredible person their son had become. As the plane began its descent into San Francisco, David's voice came over the intercom one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly. To my parents, thank you for taking this journey with me. It's one I'll never forget." Laura and Victor looked at each other, their eyes brimming with tears. This was more than a flight. It was a memory they would cherish forever. But there was one final surprise waiting for them when they landed. The plane touched down smoothly at San Francisco International Airport, the wheels kissing the runway with barely a bump. The cabin filled with the soft hum of passengers applauding the textbook landing, a tradition that Victor and Laura were experiencing for the first time. "That was perfect," Laura whispered, glancing at Victor. "Our son did that." Victor smiled, squeezing her hand. "He's a natural. Always has been." As the plane taxied to the gate, David's voice came over the intercom once more. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to San Francisco. It's been an honor to fly with all of you today. To my parents, I hope this first flight was everything you dreamed of, and more. Please remain seated until the seatbelt sign is turned off. Enjoy your time in the city." Passengers smiled at Laura and Victor, some offering congratulatory words as they gathered their belongings. The flight attendant approached their row with a bright smile. "The captain has asked me to escort you to the cockpit once the passengers have disembarked. He'd like to show you something special." Laura's heart skipped a beat. "The cockpit?" she asked, her voice a mix of excitement and nerves. The flight attendant nodded. "Yes, it's not something we usually allow, but this is a special exception." Once the passengers had exited the plane, the attendant led Laura and Victor toward the front of the aircraft. As they stepped through the door into the cockpit, they were greeted by David, who stood there in his captain's uniform, his hat tucked under his arm. "Mom, Dad," David said, his face lighting up with a wide smile. "Welcome to the flight deck." Laura's eyes widened as she took in the sight of the cockpit, the rows of buttons, levers, and glowing screens. "This is incredible," she breathed, stepping forward hesitantly. Victor, usually a man of few words, simply stared, his hand resting on the back of the pilot's chair. "So this is where you do it. This is where you fly." David laughed, reaching out to hug them both. "This is it. What do you think?" Laura looked at him, her voice trembling. I think I finally understand. When you used to talk about flying, I thought it was just a job. But now, seeing you here, hearing your voice over the speakers, I get it. This isn't just a job. It's who you are." Victor nodded, his expression filled with pride. "You made it, son. You really did." David gestured toward the co-pilot's seat. "Go ahead, Dad. Sit down for a second." Victor hesitated. "You sure?" David grinned. "Absolutely. You'll get the best view in the house." As Victor sat down, his eyes fixed on the expansive view through the cockpit window, Laura stood beside David, her hand resting on his arm. "I've never been so proud of you," she said softly. David smiled, his voice equally tender. "You and Dad made this possible. Every late-night shift, every sacrifice, it all brought me here. This moment is as much yours as it is mine." Laura's eyes filled with tears once again. "We didn't do anything special. We just wanted you to follow your dreams." David chuckled. "And here we are, 30,000 feet later." As the family soaked in the moment, the co-pilot, a kind-looking man named Jack, entered the cockpit with a smile. "Captain, we've got some photos ready for your parents. Thought you'd want them before they left." David nodded. "Perfect timing. Thanks, Jack." Jack handed Laura and Victor a small folder containing photos taken during the flight. One showed them boarding the plane, another captured the cockpit with David in his seat, and the final one was a candid shot of them looking out the window during the flight. Laura held the photos close, her voice choked with emotion. "We'll treasure these forever." Victor looked at David, his face serious but full of warmth. "You know, your mom and I have never flown before today, but after this, I think I'd do it again. As long as you're the one flying." David laughed. "That's a deal, Dad. Next time we'll go even further." As they left the cockpit and stepped onto the jet bridge, Laura paused, turning back to look at the plane. "This isn't just a flight," she said quietly. "It's a memory we'll carry for the rest of our lives." Victor placed an arm around her shoulders, nodding in agreement. "And it's all because of him." As Laura and Victor stepped into the terminal, the hum of the busy airport surrounded them. They were still overwhelmed by everything they had experienced, from the smooth flight to the heartfelt moment in the cockpit. Laura clutched the folder of photos tightly, and Victor walked beside her, his arm around her shoulders. But just as they thought the journey was over, David appeared at the end of the terminal, still in his captain's uniform. He waved them over, a mischievous smile on his face. "Wait right there," he called. Laura and Victor stopped, exchanging curious glances. "What is he up to now?" Victor muttered, though he couldn't hide the grin tugging at his lips. David walked toward them, holding a sleek white envelope. "Before you go," he said, handing it to Laura, "I have one more thing for you." Laura opened the envelope with shaking hands, pulling out 2 small slips of paper. Her eyes widened as she realized what they were: round-trip tickets for another flight, this time to Hawaii. "David!" Laura exclaimed, her voice a mix of shock and excitement. "What? What is this?" Victor leaned over to look at the tickets, his brows raising. "Hawaii? You're sending us to Hawaii?" David laughed. "Well, technically, I'll be taking you there. It's my next flight in 2 months. I want you both to experience a longer trip and see what it's like to really travel. This one's on me." Laura shook her head, tears welling up again. "David, you didn't have to do this." David placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression soft. "Mom, you've spent your whole lives giving to me and everyone else. You've never done anything for yourselves. It's about time you had a real adventure. And I can't think of a better way to thank you for everything than to show you more of the world." Victor smiled, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I don't even know what to say. You've already given us so much." David grinned. "Then don't say anything. Just promise me you'll pack a bag and be ready." Laura and Victor exchanged a look, both laughing through their tears. "I guess we're going to Hawaii," Laura said, her voice trembling with excitement. As the 3 of them walked through the terminal together, Laura glanced at her son, her heart full. "You've always been the dreamer," she said softly. "But I never thought you'd make us dream too." Victor nodded, adding, "And now you're showing us a world we never thought we'd see. That's the greatest gift anyone could give." David smiled, pulling them both into a hug. "You've already given me the greatest gift, your love and support. This is the least I can do." The terminal lights cast a warm glow as they walked toward the exit, their laughter and conversation filling the air. Laura and Victor no longer felt like first-time flyers. They felt like travelers, ready to embrace whatever adventure came next, because they had each other, and they had a son who made them believe that anything was possible. For Laura and Victor, this wasn't just a flight. It was a new chapter, a chance to step outside the familiar and discover the magic of the world around them. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments. What part resonated with you the most? And share it with someone who could use a reminder that love and family have no limits. Until next time, take care and keep dreaming. Because sometimes life takes you higher than you ever imagined.